I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day: why is The Haunting of Hill House so good, and what is the house? The reason I'm asking this question is because I have just finished watching the brand new series that has dropped on Netflix, The Haunting of Hill House. Now, before I go any further, let me lay down a couple of important ground rules. Number one, there are going to be some spoilers in this. I'm not going to do major spoilers, but there's probably going to be one or two spoilers around the edges. So if you don't want anything spoiled at all, it's probably safe just to shut this video off, go back, watch the series, and then come back at the end of it and watch this video afterwards. Secondly, a bit of a ground rule for me about horror. I love the horror genre. I think horror is a fascinating genre that allows the writers and the creators of horror to explore some interesting things. They have a certain creative freedom to explore some big and important themes that you don't really have in other genres. So when horror is done well, you can explore things like the problem of evil, the problem of suffering in the world, the struggle between good versus evil, the question of spirituality, the question of human psychology and how certain things affect us, etc., etc. I am not at all interested in torture porn. I am just not at all interested in watching graphic violence for the sake of getting off and being titillated on graphic violence. I am not interested in the Hostel films. They are torture porn. I'm not interested in the Human Centipede. I think that if you want to live a virtuous life, you've got to safeguard virtue as well as practice virtue, and that begins with what goes on in here. And so I'm not going to sit there and entertain myself by watching content that is designed to actually use graphic violence as a form of titillation. Like, hey, look at this, watch this graphic suffering, and we want you to get off on watching this graphic suffering or laugh at it or find it entertaining. Now, I do watch films with graphic violence in them, but there's always a context to it. So, for example, Saving Private Ryan is a film with graphic violence in it, but it has a context. And that graphic violence is not there for you to get off on the graphic violence. The graphic violence is there to teach you something important about the true horrors of war and the awful suffering that those men went through, particularly on those beaches at Normandy, as opposed to something like Hostel or the Human Centipede, where you're supposed to be titillated by that kind of stuff. So for me, when I talk about horror, I'm talking about atmospheric horror. I'm talking about well-written horror. It is not simply jump scares, and it's not just graphic violence. And this TV series, The Haunting of Hill House, for me, is just a sterling example of atmospheric horror at its best. Yes, there are some truly creepy and scary moments that sort of sneak up on you out of nowhere, but this is not a jump scare fest. They are not there just for the sake of scaring you. They serve a purpose in the plot, and the bigger emphasis here is really on the atmosphere and exploring these deeper themes. I think that The Haunting of Hill House is the best TV on Netflix by a long shot. It's better than Stranger Things. It is much better written, and there's got much more profound things to say, and it says them in a much better way than what Stranger Things does. Now, I mean, I like Stranger Things, but I think this is much, much better. It's more well written. I think this is probably one of the best things on Netflix now, period. I think it's definitely probably some of the best TV that has been made in the last 20 years or so. It really is that good, or in my humble opinion, it really is that good. And for me, this show is horror at its best. Yes, it is horror. So if you don't like creepy, scary things, and you don't like the exploration of some darker themes, then you're probably not going to enjoy this. But like I said, this isn't torture porn. It's not graphic violence in your face for the sake of graphic violence. The focus of this is, let's use horror as a vehicle to explore some profound things about the human experience. And what I love so much about the Haunting of Hill House is I love the fact that the emphasis is on characters and story, and it is so refreshing. Honestly, I can't rave about this enough, how refreshing it is to watch something where you have 10 hours, well actually you're probably about 10 hours in total, 10 episodes, approximately about an hour long each, where you have this total emphasis on character development and building and fleshing out these interesting characters and telling the story. And it's so refreshing to have that. The story itself is non-linear, which makes it interesting. You have really the story takes place as two different sort of events in a timeline, but they're a very short period in which each of these different events, event 1 and event 2, take place. And the way this is fleshed out over the 10 hours or so is we explore these events from the perspective of the different characters who are involved. And so the first part of the series is spent, in fact most of it, is building up and giving you the events from the different perspectives. And as the different perspectives come into play, the story is fleshed out for you. More of the story in these events, you understand exactly what has happened. And then we sort of come to this final climax, which really only happens, it starts to happen in episode 9 and really only comes to culmination in episode 10. It is just, honestly, I can't rave about this enough, how enjoyable and refreshing it is to actually experience television, like I said, where the focus is on characters and storytelling, and even more importantly than that, there is no ideology in this. This is not ideological preaching. This is a series that is coloured by, and this is not surprising at all, it is coloured by the moral philosophy of our day. It's definitely written in this period, and it is shaped. There are aspects of it that are shaped by the moral philosophy of our day. So I'm not surprised by that. Ethics and moral philosophy is a particular area of interest of mine. And so I'm not particularly shocked to discover that the art that is being produced today is coloured by these things. But what this show does not do is it does not do ideological or political preaching. And it is so damn good as a result. You are not being hectored or lectured about political ideology, about moral ideologies, about religious ideologies. And it is so refreshing. Basically, any person of any flavour, no matter where you sit on the political spectrum, no matter where you sit on the question of religion, or whether you're an atheist or an agnostic or a religious believer, anyone of any persuasion could sit and watch this show, and as long as you find the horror genre, and particularly atmospheric horror, something that isn't is to your tastes, you will enjoy this. And you will not sit there and feel that you're being lectured at or hectored or told off or being propagandized. Why? Because the focus is on none of those things. This is how you tell a story. You focus on the characters and you explore themes that are universal to the human experience. And that's why anyone of any flavour could sit and watch the show and could say, oh, I enjoy this, I'm getting something out of it. It draws you in. Like I said, it's universal. You could come back and watch the show in 20 years' time and you would still find it enjoyable. You could come back 50 years and watch it and still find it enjoyable, because it's not bound to some current political or ideological trend. It's not lecturing you. It's not hectoring you. It's just telling a story. And honestly, as you can probably tell by the emotional expressiveness of this video, it is so refreshing and so very, very enjoyable. Another thing I really appreciated about this was there is a portrayal of a Christian couple in this who are not the main family, but they're a sort of secondary family in the story who are also important to the story. But the portrayal of that family, that Christian family, is very sympathetic. It is not your typical sort of portrayal of a religious person at all. And I thought that was really, really well done. And interestingly enough, the two different families here, the two main families, and this Christian family is sort of a secondary family who are caught up in these events. They both want the same thing for their children and for their families. They want to protect them from evil and suffering in the world. And interestingly, neither family actually succeeds in doing that. And that's sort of a big part of the plot of this. And so I think it was just, honestly, it's just so well written. This is a really rich tapestry like I said, if you don't like horror or atmospheric horror, you're possibly not going to enjoy this as much. But if you're okay with that, this is such a rich tapestry. In fact, it's such a rich tapestry of storytelling that I plan to go back and revisit this show again very soon, because there's just, I think now I've watched it once through, I want to go back and then just sort of get a bit more out of the story the second time around. There's so much there to actually to engage with and to sort of contemplate. And as I said, it touches on some really profound themes. So the big question, I guess, is what is the house? What does the house represent in The Haunting of Hill House? Well, one of the big themes you'll notice in The Haunting of Hill House is the theme of time. It is something that is very present throughout this series. You have those pocket watches that people keep looking at. The idea of, a particular time something will happen. The idea of certain events and promises being made that are based on a sort of a time frame. The idea of the family coming into the house for this time period of 8 weeks to fix it up. And so there's this whole theme of time is very present. And then there's this, if you remember if you've watched it, you'll know what I'm talking about. The lady who has the broken neck, the sort of funny neck. And I won't go into too much detail if you haven't seen it, because I don't want to spoil it for you. But that particular element is really sort of lays out this idea that the house in The Haunting of Hill House is really a place where time is not linear. Time is present in sort of totality, that the past, the present, and the future are all part of this house and all play a role in this thing. It's not linear, so the one event happens here and then you move on from it. It's very much time is a big theme. And I think that's a big clue for me about what the metaphor really is here. And the metaphor I think that the house really represents is the idea of the past, in particular the idea of suffering and the hardships we might have experienced in our life in our past. And there's very much this very strong idea that your past is important, that you can't run from it, that you can't suppress it and pretend it doesn't exist. It will always surface, that the past is very much a part of shaping who we are. It doesn't have to determine and set our future in stone, but it does impact what happens next. The experiences we have definitely shape our journey going forward. If you try and hide and run from those things, they will always come back. You need to confront the past. You need to learn from the past. It's very much this idea, I think, of the past, in particular suffering, and I guess the question of evil really is very much tied up with who we are. And also this idea that when you're connected, the past and suffering in particular is not just about you. It connects you to something much bigger than you. And you think about this in the context of the house. The house is this sort of rich, almost like a society of different people and events that have all been part of this. It's not just our main characters. Instead, it's a whole history of people who are part of this. And you are part of that too. Your past and the past itself connects us to something important as we move forward. One of the other things I really loved about this was the focus on marriage and family. There's very much this idea of parental love and family love and what would you do for your children, and the sort of the authentic love that you'd be willing to give for them, and also the love between persons and what this authentic sort of self-sacrificial love it sort of touches on those themes and what this could look like. I also love the fact that there's a subplot in this that you find out towards the end about adultery. And that subplot is absolutely interesting because in most other television or writing today, adultery normally is one of two things. It's a cheap and easy plot device to break up a relationship. So how do we break this couple up? I know, let's introduce adultery and unfaithfulness, and then that'll be the excuse to break them apart. Or it's some sort of character acting on their urges. I had an urge and I had to fulfill my urge. And sometimes it's even either glorified outright or borderline glorified. And so those are the two sort of more common ways in which you might see adultery played out in a television series. What's interesting about this one is adultery happens, the adulterous event, it's not focused on, we find out about it, it doesn't glamorize it, it doesn't depict it in graphic detail, but you were told what you need to know exactly what happened. And then this is the interesting bit for me. Going forward, what you have is a moment of repentance and forgiveness and healing within that marriage that has been harmed by that evil of adultery. And it is so fascinating because what it's doing is it's elevating the importance of commitment and self-sacrificial love, and particularly the importance of marriage vows. And it's saying to them that they are so important that they're actually worth fighting for, that this couple could have run away and broken apart. But authentic love sometimes is called on to overcome even great evil in ways that are truly heroic and self-sacrificial. And this is very beautifully depicted. It's not a big part of the story, but it's there, and it's a really important moment. And I thought it was just so fascinating to see that in a modern television show. Like I said, this is about characters and story, and it was just so refreshing and so enjoyable, and I plan to go back. It's a very rich tapestry. My plea to the writers, to the creators of The Haunting of Hill House now is this. Please, whatever you do, please, 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 do not go back and write season 2 or 3 or 4. We don't need prequels about those other people who we saw, who were touched on. Let's tell their story. We don't need a sequel. We don't need a new family to come into the house and experience this all over again. This is a really well-crafted story. It is so well bookended. You've got these 10 episodes which tell a really well-told and neatly self-contained story. Please don't go ruining it by feeling that you have to oversaturate the market. I know it's going to be tempting, but please, please, please don't do it. Just let this series stand alone as a testament to how good television can be done, and it is still possible to tell good stories and to do this well and to actually focus on the craft of storytelling and developing characters and touching on these important themes of the human experience. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comments section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on PayPal or Patreon. There is a link for both in the video description below. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily Question.